I am so excited to announce that I have released the first official tarot diagnosis spread book. Tarot and Self-Discovery is a therapeutic tarot journey with over 200 spreads, including over 152 card prompts and over 50 robust tarot spreads. You can purchase a physical copy on Amazon or a digital copy at thetarotdiagnosis.com. You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. This episode is super special to me because I am joined by one of my very good friends, Daylina Miller. Daylina is a multimedia journalist with more than 15 years of experience covering local government, healthcare, environmental issues, and the LGBTQ plus community. They currently work for the NPR affiliate in the Greater Tampa Bay region in Florida. Daylina also teaches multimedia storytelling to students and professional journalists, and last year joined the Critical Thinking Witches Collective to educate witches and pagans on how to debunk misinformation and disinformation and spot AI posts. Daylina has been a practicing secular atheist witch for nearly 20 years and began reading tarot as a teenager. They started incorporating tarot into their mental health regimen a few years ago. Hi, Daylina.
Hi, Shannon.
I'm so excited that you're on the podcast today.
I am so pleased to be here.
I've been wanting to have you on as a guest for a while, and I feel like finally the world was like, oh yeah, here, this is what you're going to talk about. And this is the perfect time to have Daylina on for a conversation because you're a journalist and we're going to be exploring coping with the news and trying to balance staying informed while also trying to protect our mental and emotional well-being. We're in a world, in a space where we are kind of bombarded with 24/7 news, and a lot of times we can't control what we're being exposed to. So, and because you're in this field, I thought, you have such a unique and personal experience with this. It is literally what you do for a living. So I'm excited to have you here to explore that.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect time to have this conversation. There's so much going on in the world. In the United States, we're having a presidential election. In my part of the country, it's hurricane season. So there is so much news that we're being bombarded with. And while in my capacity as a journalist, it's much more difficult for me to strike that balance. I know it's something that all of us are struggling with to some capacity.
Absolutely. I love that you brought up too, like your part of the world, it being hurricane season, because so Daylina is in Florida. I'm from Florida. I'm very familiar with hurricane season. And there's a lot of like fear mongering that happens specifically when it comes to hurricanes. But you see that like across the board, really with everything. And there's one particular meteorologist who I love, who doesn't feed into the fear mongering and really does a good job at letting people know, hey, it's hurricane season. You're going to stay prepared. We're going to let you know what you need to know, but don't freak out. And I think that's kind of the vibe that I'm hoping to portray here as we're talking about how to manage your mental and emotional well-being while also staying informed. Because it can feel really chaotic when it's like, oh, all this stuff is happening in the world. What the hell am I supposed to do with this information? How do I know when I've consumed too much? How do I know when I've consumed too little? So it can be a little, just that in itself can be overwhelming, trying to figure out what that perfect balance is.
Definitely. There's so much to process. We have to filter through so much information. And yes, I'm a journalist, so obviously I see the value in media outlets and the First Amendment freedom of the press that the Constitution affords us. But not all news is created equal. Not all mainstream media outlets are created equal. So it's important for people to have the tools at their disposal to help sort through that information so that they can not only get at the heart of the truth, get accurate information, but also so that they are giving themselves the time and the grace to process what they're consuming.
Oh, so well said, which makes me think too, we both agreed we wanted to share just kind of a brief disclaimer for this episode. We're going to be I'm kind of like vaguely talking about what's happening in the world without actually really diving in, because this episode is also about making sure that you know how to take care of yourself and you're already bombarded with all of this information. So, as we're talking about, kind of just certain topics, know that we're not being vague so as to avoid those topics. We're just also trying to keep everyone's kind of mental and emotional health at the forefront of our mind, because everyone's emotional capacity is different. So we just want you to take care of yourself. And also, if you're listening to this episode and you start to feel overwhelmed just hearing us talk about the news, you're allowed to pause and return to this episode at a later time. You don't have to continue listening to it. So yeah, anything else that you wanted to say about that, Daylina?
Yeah, I just think it's important for, like you said, for people to be aware of the fact that we are not trying to toxic positivity our way out of this. We're not trying to, avoid very politically charged conversations. Just we really want to focus on the meat of the conversation, which is while you're out in the world, while you're in your home, while you're on your smartphone, how can you be exposed to all of this news and find a way to consume it, process it, and find that balance.
Absolutely. I would love to pull a card now to open up the episode. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Yay. All right. So I'm using, as always, Tarot Vintage. I was going to use a different deck today, but then I was like, Tarot Vintage makes me feel safe and comfortable. So I'm going to do that. What deck are you using?
Yeah, so I sort of made a similar choice myself. I have about 80 decks, and that's after thinning out my collection. But the one that I turn to time and time again is the This Might Hurt Tarot.
Yeah.
It's a favorite of mine because it's a modernized Rider-Waite-Smith, which a lot of decks are doing now and doing in various ways. But this was the first Rider-Waite-Smith deck that I had that really exposed me to different gender expressions, different sexual orientations, different body types. So it feels a lot more, not only is the imagery modernized, but it just feels a lot more inclusive. But it's still comfortable and familiar enough with the original symbolism that, when I don't want to overthink something, when I just kind of want to get down to the nitty gritty of an issue, this is the deck that I pull out.
I love that. That's kind of how I feel about my Tarot Vintage when I want to get down to the nitty gritty and also feel comfortable. But I love seeing you use the This Might Hurt deck.
It is truly one of my favorites. I backed it on Kickstarter many years ago, and it's one that I keep coming back to time and time again.
All right. I haven't pulled this card in forever. I also think it's kind of cliche that I pulled this. I pulled the Fool reversed, but it's reversed. It's not upright. What did you end up pulling?
You're going to laugh. I pulled the Four of Swords. And so what's cool, one of the things I like about the little book that comes with the This Might Hurt Tarot is that every card is sort of assigned like a line that's sort of how the author interprets that card being summed up. And in this deck, the Four of Swords is summed up as take a damn break.
Oh, that's so, it makes perfect sense for what we're talking about, which, of course, we're going to get into that at some point. Like, yeah, you're allowed to take breaks from the media. So this is interesting. Okay. So Four of Swords and the Fool reverse. So the Fool reverse, I'm thinking there's a couple different ways I feel like you could go with this. The first is maybe how dangerous it could be consuming media without any sort of boundaries or self-awareness, or not taking breaks like the Four of Swords suggests. I think the Fool reverse also could represent maybe kind of our doom scrolling or mindlessly scrolling or consuming news, again, without the boundaries that I just mentioned earlier, self-awareness, and not thinking about the impact that it's going to have on us, at the end of the day or the end of the week based on how much we've consumed. Another way that I think you could look at this card too, though, is maybe representing avoiding the news altogether and then not being informed, which also isn't great. So Yeah, there's a couple different routes you could take with this full reverse, but I feel like basically it's representing maybe just a total imbalance, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So I guess it is kind of a cool card to pull for this episode. And
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
linked with the Four of Swords, I think is great because the Four of Swords is really what I think we're trying to all hopefully achieve is maybe this sense of, internal cognitive balance with our thoughts based on what we're being given.
Right. And fours are very much cards of sort of stabilization. When I was first starting
Yeah.
my tarot journey, I would think of fours in terms of like a four-legged table or the four
Mhm.
corners of a house foundation. And so that was a sort of a trick for me to try to remind myself of like what cards meant when I was initially starting off in readings. And so, while the swords can be very scary to pull in a lot of situations for a lot of folks, I think this reminder that that you need to take that damn break. That, if you're a type A workaholic or a type A news junkie, like a lot of us are, it's really difficult to relax and to not be overwhelmed and to retreat just enough that we can still participate in the world, without being thrown back in a way that makes it difficult to engage with the things that are happening around us. Because I think sometimes there's this obligation to stick it out 24/7.
Mm.
When it comes to, especially if you come from any sort of place of privilege, right? Like, so I have white privilege, I have other various types of privilege. And so sometimes I feel like I need to stick it out and can be informed with every little detail, to make sure that I'm doing the work that maybe other people in more marginalized communities are not able to do in other capacities. But the thing is it's a marathon, not a sprint. And a really good friend of mine said, what good does traumatizing myself every hour do for people? So it's really important to be able to take a step back, get a little bit of R&R, have the appropriate time and space to process things so that you can come back in with a clear head and a sound mind, in a normal blood pressure rating.
True that. Oh my gosh, you said so many important things. And I'm thinking about this Four of Swords, and I feel like it actually kind of segues nicely into where I wanted to go opening this episode, which is being self-aware and making sure that we understand, kind of what our limits are. And hearing you talk about the Four of Swords immediately made me think about, when you're at a restaurant or even just at home and the table's kind of wobbly
Yeah.
and it's really difficult to, because then you like put too much weight in one corner and then like, someone's plate gets all, out of whack. And then you're trying to like balance this table and you're, trying to shove stuff underneath the leg of the table to keep it balanced. I think we could even use that, talking about this Four of Swords as stability, is when do you start to feel like things are a little discombobulated? Like, how do you know, that, oh, maybe one of my metaphorical table legs is a little too short now? What does it look like when, the silverware is clanking? What does that look like in your body or around you? How do you know that maybe, oh, I'm starting to reach my limit here? So I love that. That's what came up for me hearing you talk about the Four of Swords, because that's such an inconvenient, annoying experience that I don't think that we pay enough attention to when our bodies are feeling that, because of exactly what you just said. A lot of us feeling this pressure to consume, to do our part, to make sure that we are showing up and advocating for the people who need us to advocate for them, or advocating for ourselves. And, a lot of us can feel guilty, if we are not consuming or staying up to date or being as informed as possible. But like you said, your brilliant friend who was like, what good is it to traumatize yourself, is a really important statement. Because if we go back to this silly example of the lopsided table, yeah, like dinner's not fun when you are trying to balance a table upright and then eat with one hand. The same goes for taking care of ourselves, the people around us, or the causes that mean something to us, if we have not protected ourselves or taken care of ourselves in the process.
Absolutely. And I mean, to keep stretching this metaphor, of the table and the utensils and whatnot, This is where this balance comes into play. It's important to have dietary media restrictions, so that you are setting boundaries for yourself, giving yourself, the appropriate time and space to consume news on your terms instead of letting it completely overwhelm you. And, we talked a little bit about doom scrolling, and a lot of times people will try to be like, okay, I'm going to post this message on Facebook. I'm not going to be on for the next week. I'm ignoring my email. I'm ignoring the news. I'm not reachable. And for a lot of people, it's almost sort of like, going on a really strict diet.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are certain foods that you absolutely cannot eat on that diet. And then what a lot of times happens is that you end up binging. That's happened to me numerous times in my life when I've tried to make efforts to eat healthier. And when I wholesale cut something out of my diet, I end up, 2 or 3 or 4 days later, it completely consumes me and I end up binging it to an unhealthy degree instead of just, eating things in moderation. And so you kind of need to approach your news consumption in the same way, is that you need to be eating your news items in moderation.
Exactly. Because then what happens is the more that you restrict, the more your body is like, oh my gosh, once it breaks, it does everything it can to almost like make up for all of that time that it felt restricted. I think it's so important that you bring this up, because that really speaks to knowing ourselves and knowing some behavioral cues or even just bodily sensations when we're starting to get to that point of like, have I either restricted too much or have I consumed too much? So I'm thinking, so like for me, this literally just popped into my head. I'm like, what do I do? How do I know when I'm reaching that limit where I've consumed too much? And I think for me, it's when I start sending TikToks of like crazy stuff that's happening in the news, like in rapid succession to like my core group of people that I send stuff to. And in fact, oh my God, it happened this morning. Like my cousin and I were, I wake up, at like 7:00 this morning and I already have messages from my cousin who's sent me news TikToks. And then I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And so then I start scrolling through stuff and then I'm rapid succession sending him things. And I sent him like 10 things in a row and he hasn't even read them yet. And you can even hear it in my voice right now. Like even now I'm starting to like talk really fast, thinking about the type of media I consumed this morning immediately as I woke up. And I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I got sucked in. And it was, now that I'm talking about it, how ironic that I'm having this conversation with you this morning about this. But these are the things that we need to be on the lookout for when, what are these small little signs that, you've gone a little too far. And the reality is when you're engaging in that type of behavior, you're not making a difference. You're not helping anybody. The people that, I'm sending this stuff to are already seeing it. I'm in an echo chamber. Like nothing's really happening other than, you mentioned blood pressure earlier. I probably started my day with high blood pressure and didn't do anything to relax my nervous system. And
Yeah.
so being aware of that is important because then that also affects the whole rest of your day and the way you show up with people.
Oh, it completely sets the tone for the rest of the day. I used to live a little over an hour away from the news station that I work for. And so I commuted in morning rush hour traffic and in evening rush hour traffic. And I listened to initially a lot of, my own station, public radio, listened to a lot of news podcasts. And I would find that when I was driving in for the day, that if I started my day with a heavy news podcast and it was depressing, which it usually was, it made it very difficult for me to complete my work that day in the studio, to do the interviews I need to do, to be able to process all the information that's being thrown at me and distill it in a way that is easy for people to understand. Often heavy topics, the way the healthcare system works, the way, Medicaid and Medicare work and things that I would have to distill down. And it was really difficult when the tone was already set for the day. Mm-hmm. And so I found that not only did I need to get up, and not just roll out of bed and go to work, but establish like a morning routine that involved drinking a cup of tea, that involved listening to some relaxing lo-fi music. Mm-hmm. But I would also listen to something a little more lighthearted on the way into work. And the way I sort of got around the guilt of not being up to date the second that I stepped into the newsroom was I was able to find very, very short form news podcasts. Like
Yeah.
NPR, for example, has one called Up First, and it's like 12 to 15 minutes, Monday through Friday, of all the headlines, national and international, that you need to know. And I was able to do that right off my beginning part of my commute. And then I was able to like get into the lo-fi music or get into the fun fictional podcast. And then, so I felt like I was prepared when I came into the newsroom, that I had sort of done my due diligence and my duty as a journalist and as an American citizen in keeping up to speed with what's going on, but that it didn't completely wreck my day.
Oh, you're giving us such practical advice. And it makes me think of, because this is a topic that comes into the therapy room so often. I mean, over the last 8 years, as therapists, we've really had to figure out how do we manage our own distress and media consumption with our clients who are coming in and saying, and experiencing similar things, that you just talked about. How do I balance, starting my day? How do I know what to consume? Or I've consumed too much. And that process is so unique to everybody. Your process sounds so comforting. I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that you were able to, figure out how to kind of take these chunks of time and prioritize the news and the media that you needed to consume for work, but also have done such a good job making sure that you're consuming something that regulates your nervous system and makes you feel calm. I think a lot of times, things that I'm telling clients too is find an outlet, and you brought this up just a second ago, that you trust that doesn't get you heightened. That's been really important for me. Like I have like maybe three places that I go that I know when I go here, they're going to tell me what I need to know, and I'm not going to feel so amped up. But I know that there are these other places over here that really get me going, and I need to make sure I avoid those, or if they pop up on my feed, to just keep scrolling. And this actually speaks to also the concept of the window of tolerance, which we talk about a lot in therapy. And it's knowing kind of when we are in our comfort zone, and you can apply this to media consumption as well. We can consume media, even if it's media that is painful to see or experience, but still be able to regulate our emotional state and not experience PTSD. So knowing kind of what our comfort limit is, then knowing what our stretch zone is, where we're kind of like stepping outside of that comfort zone and reaching kind of dicey territory, to when we're in full blown panic zone. And there's actually, you can pull cards to this. And if you want, I would love to pull cards with you, Daylina, on this whole like comfort, stretch, panic modality. And this also shows, like, if you don't know what your comfort zone is, your stretch zone is, your panic zone is, how you can pull cards to help you better understand, what those spaces look like for you. Because it can be difficult when you are really trying to figure out, well, I don't know how I respond to media, or I don't know when I'm dysregulated. If you're in therapy or even just like listening to this podcast, you might be thinking, well, I don't know. How do I know? And that's why I think tarot is so beneficial, because the images can help bring up stuff and access parts of our brain that we weren't otherwise able to access, and give us insight into our inner world.
Absolutely. And that's much how I use tarot in everyday life, is just sort of, okay, I generally start off with a one card, pull. What does the universe need me to know? But when I say the universe, for me, pursuing tarot from a secular perspective, it's really a conversation with my subconscious. So what are the things that I'm really thinking or feeling that maybe I don't want to admit to, or that maybe are sort of just like simmering under the surface? And the imagery on the cards, or the archetypes, or the traditional symbolism might help pull that out of me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is going to be very similar to that. So you pull 3 cards: a card to represent your comfort zone, a card to represent your stretch zone, and then a card to represent your panic zone. And I think the images here too are helpful, because even when I'm working with clients who don't use tarot, and even if I'm not using tarot, I will even ask them, okay, let's just think about art. Like, what comes up for you when you think about a comfort zone? What images do you see in your mind? And someone might say, I see a peaceful garden or a waterfall. And then if I were to ask them, okay, what do you see when you think about stretching outside of that comfort zone? Like, what's just beyond the barrier, the boundaries of that? They might say, I don't know, a bear off in the distance, not close to me, but off in the distance where I have to kind of be on high alert and make sure it doesn't get too close. And then if I were to ask, okay, well, image do you see when you think about your panic zone? They might say, oh, the bear is like right in front of me and I have to run. And so pulling cards allows us to kind of have that same experience. But yeah, the image is already created for us.
Absolutely. I definitely pulled some interesting ones for this.
All right. So I'll share what I pulled and then you can share what you pulled. So I pulled reverse Page of Pentacles for comfort, reversed Knight of Cups for stretch, and then Knight of Swords upright for panic. What did you pull?
So mine are all upright. I have 10 of Wands for comfort, 8 of Pentacles for stretch, and the Devil for panic.
Oh, those are fascinating cards. I feel like I'm going to need to sit with those for a minute. So I don't purposely read reversals. I like to read every component of a card, but when it does come up reversed, maybe I do like to spend a little bit more time in that maybe kind of reversal space. So for this Page of Pentacles reversed for comfort is interesting because pages are often, they represent curiosity to me, and the pentacles are our earthly sign. They're, what we feel kind of rooted in, what is tangible, what is happening around us. So for this to show up reversed is kind of throwing me off a little bit, but I think it's fascinating because I think it speaks to a few things. There's comfort in being confident and being able to explore not only your viewpoints and the way you consume media, but also being able to hold space for others. And so if we're talking about comfort here, I think in this reverse Page of Pentacles, I think is also referencing maybe media that you're consuming that maybe you don't agree with. And so comfort here is when you can be curious about what you're hearing that maybe you don't agree with and still maintain a sense of curiosity without feeling super activated by it. Whereas this reverse Knight of Cups speaks to that stretch zone. So that's saying, the moment that we start feeling like maybe our personal experience, our emotional world is being attacked or not being validated, then we're reaching that kind of boundary or that limit of, maybe I'm starting to stretch a little bit too far. And then panic for this Knight of Swords is basically saying once you get to this point where you are just throwing your sword up into the air and like charging forward and just so angry, like trying to get people to kind of hear what you're thinking or what you're trying to portray or protect or stand up for, but doing so in a way that is very kind of impulsive and aggressive, then it's like, oh shit, I've gone too far. I think this Knight of Swords also speaks to, because I'm guilty of this, once you start yelling at your phone or the TV, like you've reached the panic zone, because you're obviously like getting really activated. This Knight of Swords is, very aggressive, ready to just like kind of go at it. So once you reach that point, it's like, oh shit, I've absolutely reached the limit. I need to take a step back. I need to figure out how to feel a little bit more grounded and go back towards this Knight of Cups and then eventually back to this Page of Pentacles.
Yeah, absolutely. The Knight of Swords is so interesting for panic because like I also see like there's this element of grace to the card in this. I'm so excited to charge forward or so passionate to charge forward that you don't always necessarily act with grace. And I experience that with the hundreds of social media comments that I type and then delete when I'm very frustrated or angry, especially about misinformation. And then it's like, okay, I need to pull back. And yes, I'm very passionate about this. Yes, this is misinformation, but what can I say that's going to add to the conversation and not what's going to contribute to the dumpster fire?
Ooh, that's such a good point. Yeah, I love that. Contribute versus, add to the conversation is important.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
tell me what you're thinking about with your cards. So you pulled 10 of Wands, Eight
Yep,
of
10 of Wands for
Pentacles.
comfort. Yep.
Okay, 10 of Wands for comfort, Eight of Pentacles for stretch, and then the Devil for panic.
Yep.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh, what are your
So,
thoughts?
yeah. So for comfort, so the 10 of Wands, it's what's really interesting for me is that, and in this particular deck, it is portrayed as somebody who's got a ton of cut lumber on their back. Like they're being weighed down by what's happening. They're, possibly overwhelmed. They've taken on too much. And so I see the 10 of Wands as sort of, you initially have a comfortable level of news that you consume, but the more that you add on, the more you move towards that stretch and that panic to the point of being, crushed under the weight of it all. So, yeah. So I think that's, it begs the question of, these things that you're carrying around, this news that you're consuming. Like, what can you do to to leave some of that behind? What can you do to organize it in a way that, makes the consumption more comfortable? Do you reach out and ask for help, from somebody to process, what it is that you've learned or experienced? So I really just see, that, more weight coming, on and being in a comfortable place to start and then moving into that stretch and that panic mode. So yeah.
I want to, before you continue with the other cards, I want to say something about that 10 of Wands. I think that's so brilliant because I think the way you describe the 10 of Wands perfectly depicts self-awareness. Like knowing what you are currently capable or willing to hold and carry when it comes to news consumption. And, also understanding because, this 10 of Wands, they're usually moving forward. They're usually like in motion. So knowing like when you're consuming media, that as you're on this journey and carrying these 10 wands that you already know that you're capable of holding, that you're still possibly going to be exposed to more. And so knowing like, okay, should I keep going? Should I just stop here? Should I drop these wands for a bit? Is there room for one or two more wands as I continue moving forward? And just being aware and knowing, okay, as I open my phone or, as I turn the TV on, or even as I walk into this room or meet with these people who are going to bring up what they've heard in the news, do I have room to carry anymore? And then, how am I going to regulate my nervous system, during the process of carrying these wands and after, once I've reached the limit?
Absolutely. Self-awareness is absolutely key, Shannon, to to this process, I think, because if you don't know what the problem is, if you don't know or understand how your body's reacting or how your mind's reacting, it's very difficult to take the next steps to, to find things that help regulate you. And I think that segues perfectly into the next card that I pulled for stretch, which was the Eight of Pentacles.
Yeah.
Because this is sort of, it's an apprentice card. It's mastering new skills. It's putting in the work, and so, especially initially as you're building a news consumption routine that's healthy, there is going to be a lot of discomfort during that process because you're learning more about yourself. You're learning more about how you process certain things. The news is always changing. You can't, tune on the TV or the radio or log into Instagram and always know exactly what you're going to encounter.
Right.
So being open to being able to pivot, to building a routine that, that allows you to take a step back and say, okay, I need to think about, whether I should be diving deeper into this topic or whether I need to step away. So self-awareness is really key. And then, as you're getting into that stretch zone and heading into panic, it takes work. It's taken me years to get to a point where I consider myself to have a relatively healthy balance of staying informed versus sanity.
Yeah, you make such a good point. Yeah, and not putting pressure on yourself to immediately go from overconsumption, dysregulation to perfectly balanced. Like that's just not possible. There's a whole trial and error period here, which honestly, I feel like the cards you pulled kind of speak to. Not only does it represent this, comfort stretch panic kind of window of tolerance concept, but I feel like it also speaks to the trial and error of, that, especially the Eight of Pentacles, like working to figure out what is going to be best for you as you try to figure out how to exist in this world where, often we don't even give consent to what we're being fed or what type of media we're consuming. We just open our phone or turn the TV on or walk around somewhere and we're just inundated with information. So yeah, your cards are speaking to a few different things, I feel like.
Absolutely. And, I struggle with the devil a lot in readings.
Yeah.
But I think it really hits the nail on the head for panic. When I pull the devil, and a lot of times it is in reference to something that I am addicted to,
Yeah.
or struggling to find that balance. And so, and news consumption really is an addiction for a lot of people. Social media use is an addiction for a lot of people. There have been studies on, what media overload does to people, what it does to them physically, what it does to them mentally and emotionally. And, and how it leads to increased feelings of anxiety and depression and hopelessness and can contribute to intrusive thoughts. So that little, computer in my pocket is very much a source of addiction for myself and for a lot of folks. And so, you have to have the self-awareness to acknowledge that that's the case for you, that you're getting that dopamine hit from, finding people commenting on your stuff, finding the likes, finding engagement. But it's important to establish, boundaries so that you are not completely consumed by this. I mean, I recently found out that my iPhone has a setting called screen time, and it allows me to select social apps, email apps, news apps, whatever apps that I want to regulate and assign a time period to them. And so I started off with 2 hours. And so once I hit 2 hours a day with my social apps, my phone blocks access to them. And so, yes, you can override it for 15-minute increments, or you can override it for the day. And that does have to happen sometimes because I use social media a lot for work. But it really, what it's helped me realize is how much time I'm spending doom scrolling on these sites, and not even necessarily consuming news or healthy news.
Right.
But, so I know when it's like 11 a.m. and like my timer comes on, it's almost embarrassing because it's like, oh my gosh, I've already dedicated 2 hours of my day to social media. And so, and Android phones have a similar function. It's called digital well-being. And so, setting that up and starting, like, maybe don't try to restrict social media for a huge amount of time. Maybe you start with 3 or 4 hours, and maybe you slowly, bring that down to an hour or 2 or less a day, and really, curating your social media feed so that you see more of what you want to see. Like, I even have multiple accounts. So I have an account where I follow mostly news sources that I trust. And so I know that if I have the capacity to consume that information, that's the account that I go to. Whereas I have other social media accounts that are more for like connecting to local art and artists. And not that there's never any intersection with politics and news, but it does help me to encounter more of the things that bring me joy as opposed to the things that really bring me down. So that's really important. And then just this idea of consuming news on your own terms. I used to have every news app. The push notifications were enabled, and it drove me up a wall.
Yeah, there's no
so
way.
don't enable push notifications. And don't have the news on passively in the background all the time. People think, when it's in the background, it's on the TV, it's on the radio, that it's not impacting their mental health. And it really is, because your brain is still capturing and processing a lot of that information subconsciously. So instead, say I'm going to watch, the newscast on TV, from 6 to 6:30, or I'm going to listen to NPR, in the morning for, 15 minutes. Like, you need to be able to set set times and set days and routines to be able to make sure that your body and your mind are that you're not harming yourself irreparably
Yeah.
by overexposing yourself to too much information at one time. And it's not, we're not androids,
Yeah.
we're not able to process a million things in the background and then a million things directly and come out of it on the other end unscathed.
Absolutely. Because you just saying that, you're speaking to both compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, which is something that you learn about like early on in the world of psychology and being a therapist. Is you have to be careful because everything that you are hearing from clients, or in this case, the news, is going to affect you in some way. So if you have some control over, what you're consuming, we want to try and limit your vicarious trauma and making sure that, you are in the right space to potentially see things that you aren't, like I said earlier, consenting to, or you might not even realize, which I think also speaks to, you gave a great point a few minutes ago, not having the news on passively in the background, or, if you are in a place where, maybe you don't have control, maybe you're at your job and that's, they have the news on in the background on a TV, on a wall or something, making sure that you can take steps so you're not constantly exposed to that. Are you allowed to wear headphones and you have music playing or a podcast that's not related to that? So just making sure that you're taking steps so that you're not being exposed to things that you're maybe not even consciously aware of that you're being exposed to.
Absolutely, Shannon. And it's, there's so much in the world that's out of our control. There's so much of the news that we're never going to be able to, as an individual, make a difference about. But there are things that you can do once you have that information in hand. So maybe instead of scrolling for several hours a day on news feeds and social media groups that push out news that aligns with their viewpoints, be informed to the point that you need to be informed, and then find other ways to take real action in the real world. Maybe that's donating to a cause that you care about. Maybe that's joining a mutual aid group, signing a petition. It could be something as small as donating $20 to a friend's medical GoFundMe. Like, do the things that are that you do have control over, because there's so much of the world that we can't predict. So much of the world that we can't change, so much of the world that we can't do much about on an individual level. That finding the things you can contribute to and the things that you can use your talents and your knowledge to affect change in your own backyard is so important. And for me personally, that helps alleviate some of that anxiety.
I think what you're speaking to really drives home the point that our exposure to news inevitably increases our anxiety and even feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. And so what you're describing, and actually research shows that this is often one of the best interventions, is getting proactive. So, and you just highlighted this beautifully, making sure that you are involved in causes or communities that highlight and nurture your values. So it's also important to understand what your value system is here now too. So there's a lot of like personal insight and self-awareness that needs to happen. But when you are engaged in community or advocating for causes that matter to you, you feel like you're doing something. And so the helplessness that, overconsumption of media can be alleviated by maybe you heard on the news that there is some sort of event happening locally for something that's important to you, and then you decide to attend that. That can actually help lower stress and anxiety related to things that you've consumed in the news. So, and that's exactly what you're speaking to, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I actually earlier this week read an article on the American Psychological Association website, and it was from research done in 2022 about media overload. And it was really interesting how the article talked about how there's really no formal formally recognized disorder or diagnostic criteria for media
Right.
overload, but that so many therapists and counselors and folks who work one-on-one with people are definitely seeing, that's a very common thread in patients and in clients is like news related stress, and helping to either limit exposure to the news or to balance the exposure to the news, installing media guardrails, so to speak,
Yes.
is really important. And that's going to vary a little bit from person to person, because person A might have no problem being exposed to news 3 hours a day.
Right.
And, or they might have no problem on Tuesday and then it's a problem on Friday, so you can't compare yourself and your emotional capacity and your exposure to anyone else, because we're all different at different points of our lives and get overwhelmed and overstimulated by different things at different times. So it's not about comparing your routine or your media guardrails to other people, but finding out what you can do to help yourself, and then sort of systematically going and saying, okay, I tried this and this helped me. Maybe keep a journal about it, almost a sort of scientific, record. I do that, scientific method record. I do that even with my tarot journaling, is not only will I write what questions I asked and what cards that I pulled, but like, what was I exposed to earlier in that day from the news? What dreams did I have that night? Like, what are all these different variables that are impacting how I'm feeling and how I'm processing this information? And so that's a really good way to help determine what your media guardrails might be, is to keep a journal or keep some sort of log about how the different processes you're implementing are actually helping or not helping you.
Yeah, such good advice. And you actually talking about how, you were kind of referencing our window of tolerance, how it's so unique to all of us, brings me to, you actually created a spread specifically for this episode. And you called it Coping with the 24/7 News Cycle, which I would love to also pull some cards to. So you created a 3-card spread. Would you like to introduce it and share it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to keep it simple. So, as somebody with ADHD and low spoons many days, I wanted something that was, relatively simple and not a large Celtic cross spread or anything that quite that complex. But, I just wanted to answer 3 simple questions with this. The first question is, what is the current state of my news consumption? So again, having that self-awareness about what your current reality and situation is. The second question is, how is my mental health impacted by the news? How are you reacting to the things that you're consuming, and how are you feeling about the things that you're consuming? And then the third, because I always like to look forward, and to, leave people on a more upbeat, positive note, is how can I set healthy boundaries, but also stay informed?
Absolutely. Great questions. I'm excited to pull to them.
Me too. I actually, I have not pulled for this spread yet. So this is the first time I'm pulling for this spread. So I'm very excited. And, because I don't, there are a lot of spreads out there, and there are a lot of really cool perspectives, that people put forth in creating those spreads. But a lot of them are very sort of ethereal. And I wanted something that was sort of earthbound and grounding and practical. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
What'd you pull?
Yeah. So for what is the current state of my news consumption, I pulled the King of Pentacles.
Oh, okay.
For how is my mental health impacted by the news, I pulled the 7 of Swords, which is kind of hilarious to me and on the nose. And then for 3, which I think is a lovely and perfect card for how can I set health boundaries but stay informed, I pulled the 9 of Cups.
I'm freaking out right now. Because so my cards with your cards are very fascinating. So you pulled the King of Pentacles for what is the current state of your news consumption, right?
Yes.
So I pulled the Ace of Pentacles.
Oh, okay.
And then for how is my mental health impacted by the news, you pulled the 7 of Swords, right?
Right.
I pulled the 7 of Wands. And then remind me what you pulled for how you can set healthy boundaries.
9 of Cups.
Okay, so you pulled 9 of Cups for how you can set healthy boundaries, and I pulled 9 of Wands.
Okay, wow.
So we both pulled a pentacle and then both pulled the same numbers, but from different suits.
That's really interesting.
I'm going to need to sit
I
with this for a
love
minute.
that.
So for the Ace of Pentacles representing what is the current state of my news consumption. So I'm going based off of imagery. And so despite the Pentacles being, the earthly suit being very grounded, the Ace of Pentacles is being held into the air. So I think that this represents that I know where I want to be with my news consumption, which is, in this beautiful little garden where I feel balanced and I don't feel overwhelmed. But the Ace of Pentacles is being held in the air. So it's not touching the ground. So there's a little maybe lack of being firmly planted and secure. But I think there's I love the aces, and especially the Ace of Pentacles representing, different ways of being in the world. I think that there's still a sense of openness into my current state of news consumption, of how I can maybe get down onto the ground and feel stable and secure. I don't, and I feel like this is pretty accurate because I am really trying hard to strike a balance between what I'm consuming and making sure that I'm not super dysregulated. But there definitely are times where I'm a little way too not grounded and up in the air. So that makes sense. And then for the second card, how is my mental health impacted by the news? I love that it's a 7 of Wands because so true. I often will feel like I'm having to defend myself, even to people who like the news anchors on TV or whatever I'm watching, this sense of I need to protect myself. And that can make me feel really anxious, really heightened. So perfect card for that. And then how can I set healthy boundaries, but stay informed? This 9 of Wands is interesting because the 9 of Wands is definitely a boundary card, but I always interpret it as super rigid and not necessarily healthy boundaries. But I'm trying to look at this through a slightly different lens. I think in the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, this person is holding on to a wand, which I think speaks to the information. So in your question, how can I set healthy boundaries but stay informed? That one single wand is the information. And then all these other wands behind this person maybe represent media or information that I could consume, but I'm choosing not to at this time, or making sure that I'm consuming it. Again, when I talked earlier about knowing what your limits are, how much can you carry right now? So maybe being aware that, oh, hey, all these outlets are out there, or I know that I can just do a quick Google search and I can find information about this topic that I might be thinking about, but I don't have to 10 of Wands this. I don't have to carry all of this. So for me, setting healthy boundaries might be I have all these wands set up and ready to access when I need them, but I'm only going to take one at a time.
Absolutely. It's about having the tools there at your disposal and using them appropriately.
Absolutely. Great summarization of that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the current state of my news consumption with the King of Pentacles, it was really interesting because I really see the King of Pentacles as sort of the ultimate abundance card. And so that makes me think of the overabundance of media options that are out there.
Yeah.
And even as somebody who is fairly well versed and educated on, the media outlets that show the least amount of bias, that have, the most neutral positions, that, are being fair and accurate and truthful, there is still so much news out there to consume, and you kind of have to piecemeal it together. Because not every outlet can be everything, so, you might need to, to do the same, to sort of piece these different outlets together, these different, news sources to get the media education, so to speak, that you need to navigate your world. And so, I see the King of, Pentacles as very, very much that. And, I know it's generally thought of, I think of as a pretty positive card. But, I also see sometimes the kings as being a little gatekeepery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a reminder that, not to get too high up on my own horse about my journalistic experience and education, when it comes to educating people on news consumption. That my opinion and my word is not the end all be all. It is just a perspective that is a result of my lived experience. So yeah, but I also feel that the King of Pentacles can be very generous in the knowledge, that they have. And I try to be a source of knowledge for people when it comes to spotting AI, spotting misinformation. I have a Substack that I'm going to be launching next month that's going to be all about spotting misinformation, spotting AI content, spotting disinformation, in the witchcraft and pagan spheres. And so I try to take the things that I have been very privileged to learn through a traditional structured education and lived experience that resulted with that, and use it to help educate people around me without gatekeeping what media sources they're going to.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. So, and then, the Seven of Swords for my mental health, so in my deck, it's a person who's running away, who appears to have just stolen a handful of swords and is kind of looking back. And, and I think this idea of like running away with this armful of swords, that likely, wherever you got those swords from or whatever person you got those swords from, like something's going to catch up with you eventually. And I see that, you may be okay for a certain time period, for days or weeks or months, even with this heavy consumption of news and not having a healthy routine, and striking that balance, but it will eventually catch up with you. And so you think you're doing okay. And then, something small, might irritate you or set you into a, meltdown. I have ADHD. And so when I get overstimulated, I can very easily go from okay to super not okay in like 0 to like 2 seconds. So, this idea that, you may think that you're doing okay. And maybe on the surface, you appear like you're doing okay, but not striking that balance, not having these media guardrails is definitely going to catch up with you at some point.
Oh, such a great interpretation of that card.
Yeah, and then I've got the Nine of Cups, and I love the Nine of Cups because, like I said, I like to end my tarot spreads on sort of a positive note. Mm-hmm. And so, the work has to be done. You have to learn how to set healthy boundaries and see what healthy boundaries work for you. But the Nine of Cups to me is so sweet. In my deck, it's an older man who is a potter, and he's got a bunch of pots and vessels that he's created behind him, and he's very content. And so, I see this as like the work has to be put into discovering what works for you and striking that balance. But once you get to that point, there is going to be, so much more relief and joy, and how you live your day to day. For me, I get very angry about the injustices of the world. And so I have a tendency to doom scroll and then get really, really mad. And then my blood pressure goes up and I can't sleep. And I'm in a heightened state of irritation. And little things that people do that I normally brush off have a tendency to, to really, really bother me. And, and I think there's a place in the world for justified anger over a lot of the things that are happening around us and happening to us. But you have to get to a point where you find some sort of internal peace and contentment, because you can't exist on that full angry mode forever. It's just not sustainable. And so, you have to put in the work to find this balance. But once you do, it is so rewarding.
That's absolutely. I think that's a good way to end the conversation, that you, despite, easily being able to feel overwhelmed by this process, like once you do strike a balance, it does feel balanced and stable and rewarding, like you said.
Absolutely.
So can you tell folks where they can find you and what type of projects you have going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you Google my name, I'm everywhere, but, but I use Instagram probably more often than anything else. So you can find me at Daylina Miller on Instagram. That is my main account. I use Daylina Miller Photography to share my photojournalism and my news coverage. And then I also use Witchy Journalist on Instagram. And that's where I share my personal secular witchcraft journey, tarot readings. And I will be using that account in October along with my Substack to give people easy to digest tidbits of information when it comes to how to debunk misinformation and disinformation, how to spot AI, not just in your news consumption, in your witchcraft and in your paganism, because while in those spheres, there are things that are very personal and that are not necessarily scientific. That doesn't necessarily make them invalid. But there are other aspects of those worlds that can cause a lot of harm when there's misinformation being passed around, essential oils or herbs to digest, or discouraging people from seeking medical care or things of that nature. And so I'm helping to kind of push back against the kind of misinformation that can truly hurt people physically and mentally, from the standpoint of a journalist who's been working for 15 plus years and helping to educate people on media credibility and integrity.
Yeah, you're going to be doing some amazing work. And I know that'll be a resource, a highly valuable resource for this community.
I'm really excited about it. And I'm really excited that I was able to talk to you today.
Me too. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow The Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails, where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.